Nobody taught you how money actually works. They taught you how to earn it, which is completely different. Earning money is a skill. Making money work is a system. And for most of your adult life, you've been developing the skill while ignoring the system entirely. That's not stupidity. That's just what happens when nobody explains the game before you start playing. Here's what I've noticed. The people who end up financially free aren't necessarily smarter. They're not luckier. They just learned, somewhere along the way, that income is raw material, not the destination. The same way a carpenter doesn't admire the wood, they build something with it. Most people admire the wood. They earn it, they feel it, they spend it. Then they go earn more. And here's the uncomfortable part. That cycle feels productive. It feels like effort. Every paycheck is proof that you showed up, that you worked, that you contributed. The problem is, the moment you stop showing up, the money stops too. You haven't built anything. You've just been running and calling it progress. This audiobook is about 7 ways to break that loop. Not theory, not motivation. 7 specific systems that people use to make money move on its own, through assets, leverage, ownership, and compounding. Some of these will feel obvious once you hear them. That feeling, that mild embarrassment of why didn't I do this sooner? That's normal. Sit with it. I'm not going to tell you to quit your job or think positive or believe in yourself. I'm going to show you how the mechanism works. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you can't unsee it, you have exactly one problem left. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I read every single one. It's always interesting to see where this reaches. Chapter 1. The Asset Equation. Everything you've ever bought has been doing one of 2 things to you. You probably haven't checked which. Most people have a vague sense that saving is good and debt is bad. That's roughly where financial education ends for the average person. Save some, spend less than you earn, maybe put something in a retirement account if you remember. It's not wrong exactly. It's just catastrophically incomplete. Because the real question isn't how much you save. It's what your money is doing while it sits there. Or more accurately, what everything you own is doing to you while you live with it. There are 2 categories: assets and liabilities. You've heard these words, but I want you to feel the difference, not just understand it intellectually. An asset puts money in your pocket without requiring your active presence. A liability takes money out. That's it. That's the whole framework. The reason it matters so much is that most people have spent their entire adult lives enthusiastically acquiring liabilities while calling them assets. Your car, your new phone, your designer furniture, your subscription to 6 streaming services you use 2 of. These are not neutral objects. They are active drains. Every month, they reach into your account and take something, and you agreed to that arrangement, usually because the thing felt good to buy. I'm not judging the purchase. I've made every single one of those mistakes personally, usually while feeling quite sophisticated about it. What I'm doing is naming the mechanism. Because once you see it clearly, you can't pretend it isn't there. Here's the psychology behind why this is so hard to fix. Liabilities are often designed to feel like status. The car signals success. The apartment in the nice neighborhood signals arrival. The wardrobe signals that you've made it. And status is deeply biologically motivating. We are social animals. We care what the group thinks. Spending money on visible things that communicate success feels rational because in some ancient part of your brain, it actually is rational. The problem is that the modern economy has figured out how to exploit that instinct at scale. Advertising doesn't sell you products. It sells you the feeling of being the kind of person who owns that product. And that feeling costs you your financial future, one purchase at a time. The wealthy are not immune to this, but somewhere they learn to ask a different question before spending. Not can I afford this? Because that question is almost designed to produce a yes. Instead, is this going to put money in my pocket or take it out? That question kills the mood at the dealership. It's a very useful question. Now let's talk about what an asset actually looks like in real life, because the concept stays vague until you attach it to numbers. A rental property generates monthly income while simultaneously building equity. A dividend-paying stock index fund deposits small amounts into your account quarterly while growing in value over decades. A digital product, a course, a template, an ebook, sells while you sleep if you built it correctly. A small business with systems and staff runs without your constant presence and produces cash flow. These are not exotic instruments available only to the already wealthy. They are accessible at different scales to almost anyone with income and patience. The person who buys one small apartment and rents it out for $300 above their mortgage payment has made a fundamentally different financial decision than the person who bought a BMW that loses $5,000 in value the moment it leaves the lot. 10 years later, those two decisions have compounded into completely different lives. Here's a concrete version. Say you have $50,000. You could buy a car, a good one that feels like an achievement. In 10 years, that car is worth maybe $8,000, and you've spent thousands more maintaining it. Or you could use that $50,000 as a down payment on a modest rental property that generates $500 per month after expenses. In 10 years, you've collected $60,000 in rent. The property has likely appreciated. You've built equity. That same $50,000 became a machine. The car became a memory with rust on the wheel wells. I want to be honest about something, though. The asset path is not emotionally satisfying in the short term. This is why most people don't take it. Assets are boring to acquire. Buying an index fund does not feel like buying a BMW. There is no moment of arrival. Nobody at a dinner party says you have a rental property with the same energy as is that the new Porsche. The wealthy accept this trade-off consciously. The appearance of wealth and the reality of wealth are almost always in direct tension. The people who look the richest are often the least financially free. The people who are genuinely financially free often look disappointingly normal on the outside. This is not accidental. It's the outcome of a disciplined decision made over years to prioritize what works over what signals. The other thing that makes assets difficult is patience. Compounding is the most powerful force in personal finance, and it is almost completely invisible in year one. You invest consistently. Nothing dramatic happens. You do it again. Still nothing dramatic. The line on the graph looks flat for years, and then suddenly, it doesn't. Compounding is not linear. It's exponential. And exponential curves look like failure right up until they don't. Most people quit during the flat part. They look at their portfolio after 18 months and feel underwhelmed and redirect the money towards something that feels more immediately satisfying. That is the moment that separates the two groups. Not intelligence, not luck. The ability to stay in the game during the ugly, boring, unrewarding middle part. There's a behavioral pattern I want to name because it's very common. People often cash out their first small investment gains to buy something. They treat the return as permission to spend, and in doing so, they reset the compounding clock entirely. The money that could have stayed in motion gets converted into something static, something that depreciates, that costs maintenance, that takes up space. The wealthy let their assets mature. They leave the gains in the machine. Building an asset base requires two mindset shifts. First, stop measuring your financial life by what you own. Start measuring it by what generates income without your direct effort. A person earning $2,000 a month in passive income has more actual freedom than someone earning $15,000 a month who needs every dollar just to maintain their current life. Second, start treating every dollar as something with a job description. The rich don't ask what they can buy with $1,000. They ask where to assign it so it comes back with friends. That's a different relationship with money. It's more deliberate, less emotional, and it compounds. Start wherever you are. Buy your first share. Create one digital product. Research one small property in a market you understand. The amount doesn't matter as much as the habit, because the habit, maintained over years, becomes the architecture of financial freedom. The uncomfortable truth is this: right now, today, the money you're spending on things that drain you could be buying things that pay you. Not all of it. Some of it. Enough of it. You don't need to become a monk. You need to become slightly more deliberate than you currently are. That margin between your current behavior and slightly more deliberate is where financial futures are built. Every dollar has two possible destinies. It can work for you, or it can disappear into something that only worked for whoever sold it to you. You get to decide. Most people just never realize that's a decision they're making. Chapter 2. The Landlord Mindset. The most boring investment in history has made more millionaires than every exciting investment combined. And people still overlook it because it doesn't make for good cocktail conversation. Real estate, specifically rental real estate. Not flipping, not speculating, not waiting for the market to do something dramatic. Just owning property that someone else pays to live in, while time quietly does its work. I want to explain why this particular system is so powerful, because most people understand it only on the surface. They think, buy property, collect rent, make money. That's accurate but incomplete. The real power of rental real estate isn't the rent. It's the structure of the whole arrangement. Let me walk you through the actual mechanics. You find a property. Let's say it costs $200,000. You put $40,000 down, 20%. You borrow the rest from a bank. Now here's where it gets interesting. You put a tenant in that property. They pay you $1,600 a month. Your mortgage, taxes, and basic maintenance come to $1,300 a month. You net $300 a month. That doesn't sound revolutionary, but look at what's actually happening. Your tenant is paying off your loan. Every month, a portion of that $1,300 mortgage payment is reducing your debt and increasing your ownership stake. You're not paying down a liability. Someone else is paying down your asset. That's leverage. That's the bank's money, working in your direction, funded by someone else's rent check. After 20 years, you own the property outright. The loan is gone. The tenant paid it. And the property, assuming you chose reasonably well, is worth considerably more than $200,000. You didn't pay the bulk of that. Time and leverage did. That's not an investment. That's a machine. Most people's relationship with real estate is deeply personal. Their home is where they live. It carries emotional weight, memories, identity, stability. That's legitimate. But it creates a confusion that costs people enormously. Your home is not an investment. It's a place you live. It costs you money every month in mortgage, maintenance, taxes, and the occasional plumbing disaster at the worst possible time. It may appreciate, yes, but it doesn't generate income. It consumes it. The investment property is the one with someone else's name on the mailbox. This is the landlord mindset, not a personality type, a framework. You look at property the way an investor looks at any other asset, through the lens of cash flow first, appreciation second, and emotional attachment never. The psychological barrier most people face is scale. They hear real estate and picture something unreachable, large down payments, complex mortgages, tenants calling at midnight about broken heaters. And some of that is real. Property management has friction. It is not completely passive, especially early on. But the friction is manageable, and it's finite. Here's what I mean. The due diligence is front-loaded. You research the market. You run the numbers. You screen tenants carefully. You set up systems. After that initial investment of time and attention, the asset runs on its own rhythm. Rent comes in. Mortgage gets paid. Equity builds. You're not trading hours for that. You set it up once. Good tenant selection is the most underrated skill in real estate. A reliable, long-term tenant transforms a rental property from a stressful venture into a genuinely quiet income stream. A bad tenant transforms it into a part-time job you didn't apply for. The screening process, credit history, employment verification, references is boring. Do it anyway. Location deserves serious thought. This is not about finding the trendiest neighborhood. It's about understanding demand drivers. Is there employment nearby? Schools? Infrastructure development? Population growth? People rent near where they work and where their children go to school. Those fundamentals don't change quickly, and they sustain demand over decades. The mistake most beginning investors make is buying in an area they're familiar with emotionally rather than analytically. The neighborhood you grew up in feels safe as a choice. The numbers have to validate that feeling. If they don't, the comfort of familiarity is just bias wearing a disguise. Real estate also hedges against something that quietly destroys wealth for most people: inflation. When inflation rises, rents rise with it. The cost of everything goes up, including what tenants will pay for housing. Meanwhile, your mortgage payment stays fixed. You borrowed at one rate, and that rate doesn't change. So in an inflationary environment, your income grows while your largest cost stays flat. The spread between those two numbers is pure gain. This is why sophisticated investors don't just tolerate inflation. They've structured their assets to benefit from it. There's a concept called house hacking that's worth understanding because it lowers the entry barrier dramatically. You buy a duplex or small multi-unit property. You live in one unit. Your tenants pay rent. That rent offsets, sometimes entirely eliminates, your own housing cost. You're building equity, generating income, and reducing your monthly expenses simultaneously. From one purchase. It's not glamorous. Living next door to your tenants is not the aesthetic most people imagine when they picture financial success. But financial success in its early stages, rarely looks the way people imagine it. It usually looks like a practical decision made slightly before it was comfortable. The compounding effect of real estate over time is genuinely difficult to overstate. The property you buy in your 30s, managed with patience and minimal debt, can become the cornerstone of your retirement. The rent doesn't stop because markets are volatile. It doesn't disappear because a tech stock corrected. People need housing in every economic condition. That consistency is the foundation of why this asset class has built more generational wealth than almost anything else. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people know all of this, roughly. They've heard the arguments. They've nodded along. And then they bought another car, or upgraded their apartment, or found a reason why real estate wasn't the right moment yet. The right moment is a myth. The market is never perfect. The down payment is never completely comfortable. The timing never aligns perfectly with everything else in your life. Real investors don't wait for perfect conditions. They buy in acceptable conditions, manage carefully, and let time close the gap. The difference between the person who owns 3 rental properties at 50 and the person who doesn't isn't intelligence or luck. It's the decision made at 30 to treat a piece of real estate as a tool rather than a trophy. One builds your wealth while you sleep. The other just sits in the driveway. Chapter 3. The machine you build once. One piece of content, uploaded once, is still earning money for someone right now. That someone is not you. That's not an accusation. It's just a fact worth sitting with. The digital economy has created something that didn't exist at scale before this generation. The ability for a single person, with a laptop and a clear idea, to build an income stream that operates completely independently of their time. Not in theory, in practice. Right now, thousands of people are receiving money into their accounts for work they finished months or years ago. That's not passive income in the motivational poster sense. It's leverage. Specifically, it's the leverage of creating something once and delivering it infinitely. Let me explain the math because it makes the concept concrete. In a traditional service model, your income is capped by your hours. You have roughly 2,000 working hours a year. Every dollar you earn is attached to one of those hours. When the hour ends, the dollar stops. In a digital asset model, your income is capped by demand, which has no theoretical ceiling. The same online course can be purchased by one person or 10,000. The same effort went into creating it either way. That's not an incremental improvement in efficiency. That's a structural change in how income is generated. The categories are wider than most people realize. Online courses, e-books, templates, stock photography or footage, software tools, newsletters with paid subscriptions, YouTube channels monetized through advertising, podcasts with sponsorships, digital art, licensed music. Each of these operates on the same fundamental principle. You build it once, you improve it occasionally, and it earns without your constant presence. Now here's the part that's less romantic. Building a digital asset that actually earns is not fast. It is not a weekend project that transforms your finances by Tuesday. The creation is often quick. The earning is not. There is a lag between the work and the return that most people cannot psychologically tolerate. This is the graveyard of digital income attempts. Not lack of skill, not bad ideas. The inability to stay consistent through the phase where you're putting in real effort and getting back almost nothing. Most people upload 5 videos, write 3 blog posts, publish 1 product, see modest numbers, and conclude that it doesn't work. What they're actually experiencing is normal early-stage compounding. It looks like failure. It is not failure. A YouTube channel might spend a year gaining negligible traction, then hit an algorithmic inflection point and grow explosively. A course might sell 5 copies in month 1 and 500 copies in month 18, once the creator has built trust and traffic around it. The asset doesn't change. The accumulation of exposure changes. This is the thing about digital leverage that separates it from almost every other form of income building. The same piece of content you created in January can reach new people in October without any additional work. It compounds through time. The archive builds. The catalog deepens. The algorithm develops a relationship with your content. Search engines index your work and send you traffic you never specifically asked for. I want to give you a number that matters. Take a modest scenario. You build an online course. Solid, genuinely useful, priced at $97. Not a blockbuster. Just a real course for a real audience. Over 3 years, averaging about 6 sales a month, which is extremely modest. That's 216 sales. That's $20,952 from something you built once. You probably spent 40 or 50 hours creating it. Work out the hourly rate on that. Then ask yourself why you're not building one. The answer, usually, is one of 3 things. You don't think your knowledge is valuable enough. You're afraid of being judged publicly. Or you're waiting until you know more. All 3 of these are delays dressed up as reasons. What you know right now is more than someone else knows. That gap is the product. The person who knows nothing about budgeting will pay real money for a clear, practical explanation from someone who figured it out 3 years ahead of them. You don't need a PhD. You need a result that someone else wants. Digital assets also do something psychologically important beyond the income. They build authority. When you consistently publish useful content in a specific domain, you become associated with that domain in people's minds. That association attracts more attention. More attention attracts more opportunities, not just sales, but speaking, consulting, partnerships, clients. The content works as marketing and as product simultaneously. Every free piece you publish is a demonstration of what you know. Every paid product is the deeper version of that demonstration. The funnel builds itself if you feed it consistently. Automation is what converts a digital asset from semi-passive to genuinely passive. Email sequences that sell your product while you sleep. Ad campaigns that bring new visitors to your content. Payment processors that deliver your digital file the moment someone buys, without your involvement. These systems have entry costs. Time to set up, sometimes small financial costs. But once running, they extend your earning window to 24 hours a day. The compounding is quiet and cumulative. A blog post written today might rank on page 3 of Google immediately. In 6 months, it moves to page 1. Now it's sending you traffic every single day without any additional effort on your part. That's not theory. That's how search engines work. The work you did in the past keeps paying you in the present. Here is the uncomfortable truth. The reason most people don't have digital income is not that the opportunity isn't there. It's that they consume digital content instead of creating it. They watch the person on YouTube explaining personal finance instead of making the video. They buy the course instead of building one. They read the newsletter instead of writing it. Consumption is comfortable. Creation is uncomfortable, and the market pays specifically for the discomfort of creation. That's why creators earn. The barrier isn't talent. It's the willingness to show up imperfectly, publicly, consistently, over time. The window for building digital assets is not closing, but it is becoming more competitive. The people who started 3 years ago have an advantage over the people starting today, who have an advantage over the people starting 3 years from now. The best time was earlier, the second best time is now. Stop consuming someone else's digital empire. Start building your own. Chapter 4. The Reinvestment Trap. The moment you make your first real money is also the moment most people blow it. Not through ignorance, through relief. There's a psychological phenomenon that nobody warns you about when you start building income. The moment the effort starts producing real returns, a business turning a profit, an investment growing meaningfully, a side project generating real cash, something happens in your brain. The pressure releases. You made it. You proved it works. And your mind, which has been operating under the tension of will this work for months, suddenly exhales and says yes, and now we should reward ourselves. This is the moment that separates the people who build real wealth from the people who perpetually reset to zero. The reward instinct is not irrational. It's deeply human. You worked hard. You took a risk. You delayed gratification through the ugly middle part. The profits arrive, and they feel like evidence that you deserve something better than what you currently have. A nicer car, a better apartment, a vacation that actually costs money. And here's what makes it genuinely tricky. None of those things are terrible in isolation. The problem is the timing. Spending profits early doesn't just reduce your bank account. It interrupts compounding. And interrupting compounding is the most expensive financial mistake you can make, because the damage isn't visible immediately. It shows up 5 years later as the gap between where you are and where you would have been. Compounding is not forgiving of interruptions. It's patient and it's mathematical. Money that stays in the system reproduces. Money that gets converted into a BMW does not reproduce. The BMW depreciates. The investment compounds. After a decade, these two decisions have created two completely different financial positions. And the person who bought the BMW often can't identify exactly where things went wrong. Let me be concrete. Two people start side businesses in the same month. Both generate $8,000 profit in year one. Person A takes $6,000 of that profit and upgrades their lifestyle. New furniture, nicer clothes, a weekend away. Reasonable stuff. They reinvest $2,000. Person B reinvests $7,000. Better tools. Targeted advertising. One freelance hire for the tasks eating their time. They keep $1,000 for themselves as a deliberate, modest reward. By year 3, Person B's business is not slightly larger than Person A's. It's categorically larger. The reinvestment didn't just add, it multiplied. Better tools produced more output. The advertising brought compounding traffic. The hire freed up hours that Person B put back into higher value work. The $5,000 difference in year 1 created a $50,000 difference in year 3. Person A looks at Person B and thinks they got lucky. They didn't. They just didn't interrupt the machine. This principle extends beyond business. It applies to investment returns, rental income, and any other cash-generating system. The question after every win is not what do I get to buy now? It is what does this capital do next? The wealthy have a different emotional relationship with profit. They don't feel it as permission. They feel it as responsibility. This dollar has worked its way to me. Now I have to give it a job. That's not deprivation. It's a fundamentally different relationship with money, one that treats capital as a living system rather than a reward to be consumed. Warren Buffett, the most quoted person in any financial audiobook, and I'm not breaking that tradition, has lived in the same house since 1958. Not because he can't afford better, because the house isn't the point. The capital that stays in the system is the point. His net worth compounding over 70 years is the direct result of not interrupting the machine for status purchases. You are not Warren Buffett. Neither am I. But the principle scales down perfectly. If you earn $500 profit this month and reinvest $400 of it, you're applying the same fundamental logic at a smaller scale. The habit is what matters. The scale follows the habit. There's a related trap that's slightly more subtle. The lifestyle inflation trap. Every time your income increases, your lifestyle upgrades to match it. The raise gets absorbed by a nicer apartment. The bonus funds a holiday that now feels necessary. The business growth justifies a more expensive car. This is the hedonic treadmill in financial form. You earn more, spend more, feel the same. No ground is gained. The income number goes up. The freedom number stays flat because freedom doesn't come from income size. It comes from the gap between income and expenditure, specifically from what that gap is doing while you're living your life. The discipline required here is real. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Saying no to visible lifestyle upgrades when you've genuinely earned them is not easy, especially when the people around you are spending, especially when culture is constantly showing you what your income should look like in possessions. But here's the frame that makes it slightly more bearable. Every time you redirect profit back into the system, you're not depriving yourself. You're buying future freedom. That $5,000 reinvested today might generate $500 a month in passive income within 3 years. You're not skipping the vacation. You're buying the ability to take a much longer vacation later without checking your account while you're there. Delayed gratification is not the same as permanent deprivation. It's trading a small present comfort for a larger future one. The math is wildly in favor of waiting. The psychology makes it feel the other way around. Recognizing that gap between what feels true and what is true is most of the work. Small reinvestments also matter more than people give them credit for. You don't need to reinvest tens of thousands to build momentum. Redirect $200 into a marketing experiment for your side project. Put $300 into an index fund instead of a dinner out. Spend $150 on a course that makes you demonstrably better at something income relevant. These are not dramatic gestures, but they compound. And they build the habit, which is more valuable than any single reinvestment amount. The habit changes how you see money over time. When reinvestment becomes automatic, profit stops feeling like a finish line and starts feeling like fuel. You stop asking, "What do I get?" and start asking, "What does this unlock?" That shift in framing is what financial maturity actually looks like. Not sacrifice, not asceticism. Just a different question asked at the moment the money arrives. The uncomfortable truth is this. Most people will never be financially free, not because they didn't earn enough, but because they spent the moments that mattered. Every profit point is a fork. One road leads to a short-term feeling. The other leads to a system that removes the need to keep asking if you can afford things. You already know which road is which. The question is whether you'll take the one that's harder to feel good about in the short term. That choice, made consistently, is how ordinary income becomes extraordinary freedom. Chapter 5. Your stuff is sleeping. You own things that other people would pay to use. You just haven't asked them yet. This is not a metaphor. It's a literal description of most people's lives. Sitting in your driveway, your spare room, your closet, your hard drive, there is value that is currently generating nothing, not growing, not earning, just existing. And in a world where idle resources have never been easier to monetize, that idleness is a choice. An unconscious one, usually, but a choice. The sharing economy didn't invent a new economic principle. It just made an old one visible at scale. The principle is this: underutilized resources are wasted resources, and waste in a financial sense is not neutral. It's a slow leak. Because everything you own has a carrying cost: depreciation, storage, maintenance, insurance, whether it earns or not. Your car sits parked for roughly 22 hours a day. I looked this up once and immediately felt strange about it. The average privately owned vehicle is in motion for maybe 2 hours daily. The other 22 hours, it's just a depreciating object taking up space and costing you money through insurance and registration. It is, financially speaking, aggressively unproductive for the vast majority of its existence. Platforms like Turo changed the math on that. A car rented out 3 or 4 days a week can generate $400 to $600 monthly, depending on the vehicle and market. That doesn't just offset ownership costs. In many cases, it eliminates them entirely. The car becomes cost neutral or net positive. The same object, same driveway, completely different financial role. That's not a side hustle. That's a mindset shift about what ownership means. Most people think of ownership as the right to use something. The financially sophisticated think of ownership as responsibility for an asset. Those two frames produce completely different behavior. One person buys a car to drive. The other person buys a car that also drives revenue when they're not using it. The same logic applies to your home. A spare bedroom sitting empty is a decision. Specifically, the decision to forego income in exchange for the comfort of having unused space. That's a legitimate choice, but it should be a conscious one. A spare room in a reasonable market, listed on a short-term rental platform, can generate $800 to $1,500 monthly depending on location. That's real money, appearing from something you already own and already pay for. Even more granular. A parking space in a dense urban area can rent for $150 to $400 monthly. A storage unit carved out of an unused basement. A photography backdrop and some studio lighting converting a spare room into rentable creative space for a few $100s a weekend. These feel small individually. They compound into something significant together. Multiple quiet streams flowing from assets you were ignoring. The category extends beyond physical objects. Consider equipment. A professional camera setup sitting unused between shoots. Power tools used twice a year. Camping gear that emerges once a summer. Musical instruments played occasionally. All of these have rental markets. Peer-to-peer platforms exist specifically to connect people who own things with people who need them temporarily. The owner earns. The renter avoids buying something they'd rarely use. Both parties win. Here's where the psychology gets interesting. Most people's objection to renting out their possessions isn't practical. It's emotional. The car feels personal. The camera feels precious. The spare room feels like it might be needed someday. For a guest, for a project, for some vague future use that never quite materializes. These objections are real, but they're worth examining carefully. Because what you're actually trading is emotional comfort for financial opportunity. The car stays pristine and unrented. The camera stays safe and unearned. The room stays available for the guest who visits twice a year. I'm not saying the emotional consideration is wrong. I'm saying it has a price tag. And most people have never calculated that price tag explicitly. When you do, the decision becomes clearer. Is having the car exclusively available to me worth $500 a month in foregone income? Sometimes yes. But it should be a conscious yes, not a default one. The deeper principle here is about the word utilization. Wealthy people and sophisticated investors think about utilization constantly. Is this asset working? Is this resource being deployed? Is this capital sitting idle, or is it in motion? The goal is not to own more. The goal is to extract more value from what you already own. Those are fundamentally different orientations, and they produce fundamentally different outcomes. A simple exercise. Write down the 10 most valuable things you own. For each one, ask 2 questions. What is this costing me monthly? Depreciation, insurance, maintenance, storage, and what could this realistically earn if I put it to work? The gap between those 2 numbers is your current opportunity cost. For most people, it's larger than they expect. Skills belong on this list too. Your expertise, the thing you do at work, the hobby you've mastered, the knowledge you've accumulated, is an asset that can be rented. Tutoring, consulting, coaching, workshops, online courses, these are all forms of renting your knowledge. You built that knowledge over years. The market will pay to access it temporarily. The knowledge economy has made this genuinely accessible at small scale. You don't need to be a recognized expert with credentials and speaking fees. You need to know something useful that someone nearby or online doesn't know yet. A skilled home cook teaching weekend classes. A fluent Spanish speaker tutoring online. A marketing professional consulting for small businesses on weekends. These are not theoretical scenarios. They're happening constantly, quietly around you. There is an operational consideration worth addressing directly. Renting your possessions or skills does create some friction. Platforms charge fees. There's coordination involved. Occasionally things go wrong. A renter damages something. A client is difficult. A booking falls through. These are real costs, but they're quantifiable, and in almost every case, they're smaller than the opportunity cost of doing nothing. Insurance can usually be extended to cover rental use. Platforms often provide their own protections. Contracts and deposits address risk with clients. The friction is manageable. The people who never start because the logistics feel complicated have confused unfamiliar with difficult. They're not the same thing. There's a final layer to this that goes beyond individual items or skills. It's a broader orientation toward your life and what's in it. When you start thinking of your possessions as potential assets rather than just objects, you start buying differently. You start asking, before any significant purchase, whether this thing could pay for itself, whether it fits into a productive role in your financial life, not just a comfortable one. A camera that earns when you're not shooting. A van that generates income on weekends. A property that covers its own costs and then some. These aren't just purchases. They're deployments. Capital allocated to objects that generate returns. This is how people of ordinary income build extraordinary positions over time. Not through dramatic windfalls. Through the patient, systematic activation of assets that most people let sit idle. The uncomfortable truth here is blunt. Your stuff is not working for you. It's costing you. And the difference between those two conditions isn't a large investment or a complicated plan. It's a few hours of setup and the willingness to see your possessions as something more than things you own. They could be things that own part of your future. Start with the most obvious one. The thing sitting idle right now that has a clear rental market and a straightforward path to income. List it. See what happens. That small action, that first step from idle ownership to active utilization, is the beginning of thinking like an investor. And thinking like an investor, sustained over years, is what actually changes the numbers. Chapter 6. The single point of failure. Every person who lost everything financially had one thing in common. They trusted one thing completely, one employer, one market, one investment, one business, one income stream that felt so stable, so established, so historically reliable, that building alternatives felt unnecessary, even slightly paranoid. Why diversify when this is working so well? This question gets answered eventually, usually at the worst possible moment. The financial concept of diversification is one of those ideas that everyone nods at and almost nobody implements properly. It gets reduced to a cliché, don't put all your eggs in one basket, and then filed away while people proceed to put all their eggs in one basket, with great enthusiasm and confidence. Here's what concentration actually feels like from the inside. It feels like conviction. It feels like expertise. When you've built something that works, a career in a specific industry, a stock portfolio concentrated in a sector you understand, a business reliant on one large client, the concentration feels like focus, like commitment, like the opposite of the scattered, half-hearted approach that produces mediocre results. And sometimes it is those things. Concentration produces outsized gains when you're right. The problem is what happens when you're wrong, or when the world changes around you in ways that have nothing to do with how right or wrong you were. The COVID-19 pandemic is the clearest recent example. Industries that had been stable for decades disappeared in weeks, not because the businesses were poorly run, not because the owners made bad decisions, because an external event restructured the entire economy with no warning and no regard for anyone's plans. The people with diversified income, rent still coming in, investments still generating dividends, digital income still flowing, absorbed the shock and adapted. The people with single-source income watched everything stop simultaneously. That's not a black swan argument for paralysis. It's an argument for engineering resilience into your financial life, the same way engineers build redundancy into critical systems. Not because failure is likely, because failure is possible, and possible plus unprotected equals catastrophic. Let me describe what genuine diversification looks like at a realistic personal scale. A person earning a salary puts 15% of income into a diversified index fund portfolio every month. They own one modest rental property generating $400 monthly cash flow. They've built a small digital product, a course, a template pack, that generates inconsistent but real income, averaging $200 monthly. They keep 3 months of expenses in a high-yield savings account. Now an event happens. They lose their job. In the concentrated version of this life, that's a crisis. Income stops. Bills continue. Savings drain. Panic sets in. Decisions get made under duress, which is exactly when decisions are worst. In the diversified version, it's an inconvenience. The rental income continues. The digital product continues. The investment portfolio isn't touched. It's not for emergencies. That's what the savings are for. The person has time. Time to think, to search deliberately, to negotiate from a position of partial security rather than desperation. Time is the hidden asset that diversification buys you. Not just money. Time. And time during a financial disruption is worth an enormous amount. Diversification across asset classes is the most commonly discussed form. Stocks, bonds, real estate, cash, different risk profiles, different liquidity characteristics, different responses to economic conditions. When one declines, others typically don't decline simultaneously or at the same rate. The portfolio breathes rather than crashes. But there's a level of diversification that most financial conversations skip entirely. Income stream diversification. Not just what you own, but how money comes to you. A salary is one stream. Rental income is a second. Dividends from investments are a third. A side business is a fourth. Digital product income is a fifth. Each stream has different characteristics. The salary is reliable but dependent on someone else's continued decision to employ you. Rental income is consistent but requires some management. Investment dividends are passive but tied to market conditions. Side business income is variable but controllable. Digital product income is scalable but requires upfront building. No single stream is perfect. Together, they create a financial life that is structurally resistant to any single disruption. There's a geographic dimension to this that more people should think about. Holding assets in only one currency, in only one country's markets, creates exposure to that country's specific economic and political conditions. Inflation, currency devaluation, regulatory changes, political instability. These affect specific geographies more than others at any given time. International index funds, global ETFs, assets denominated in different currencies. These aren't exotic instruments for sophisticated traders. They're available to anyone with a brokerage account and a willingness to look slightly beyond domestic markets. The goal isn't complexity for its own sake. It's reducing the single point of failure that comes from being entirely dependent on one country's economic health. Here's where I want to be precise. Because diversification has a common misapplication. Owning 12 different tech stocks is not diversification. It's concentration in one sector with more names. If the technology sector corrects sharply, all 12 move together. You've created the appearance of diversification without the substance of it. True diversification means exposure to different asset classes that respond differently to economic conditions. Real estate, domestic equities, international equities, fixed income, cash, alternative income. These don't all move in the same direction at the same time. That's the point. The time dimension deserves its own attention. Investing a large sum all at once creates timing risk. If you buy at a peak, recovery can take years. Spreading investments across time, investing a consistent amount monthly regardless of market conditions, removes the anxiety of timing. You buy more shares when prices are low, fewer when prices are high. Over time, your average cost tends to be favorable. This strategy, dollar cost averaging, is less exciting than trying to time the market and significantly more effective for most people. The emotional benefit of diversification is undervalued. When your financial life rests on one pillar, every vibration in that pillar is terrifying. You watch the market obsessively. You track your employer's financial health anxiously. You feel every dip as a personal threat. That anxiety is not just uncomfortable, it's cognitively expensive. Decisions made from financial anxiety are consistently worse than decisions made from financial stability. Diversification buys you equanimity. The ability to see a market dip and think one of my positions is having a bad quarter rather than my entire financial life is at risk. That mental state produces better decisions, clearer thinking, and the patience to let long-term strategies actually play out long-term. The uncomfortable truth is this: most people aren't undiversified because they don't know better. They're undiversified because diversification requires saying yes to things that feel less certain than their current dominant position. The salary feels safe. The familiar stock feels like a known quantity. The single business feels like focus. Real safety isn't the feeling of certainty in one position. It's the engineering of a structure that can survive being wrong about any single position. Build multiple pillars. Not because any one of them will definitely fail, but because the ones that don't will hold everything up when one eventually does. Chapter 7. Build something of your own. You've spent years making someone else's vision work. You're very good at it. That's the trap. Not because employment is wrong. Employment is a perfectly reasonable arrangement. You provide skill and time. They provide stability and income. The problem is what it does to your thinking over time. When you work inside someone else's system long enough, you start to forget that systems can be built, that the thing you're operating, the business, the process, the product, didn't appear from nowhere. Someone made it. Someone who, at the starting point, knew roughly what you know now. A side hustle or small business is not primarily a financial decision. It's a cognitive one. It's the decision to stop being exclusively an operator inside someone else's machine and start being an architect of your own. The financial benefits follow from that shift. They don't precede it. Most people who want to start something spend an extraordinary amount of time in preparation. Research, planning, thinking, more research, refining the idea, waiting for the right moment, waiting for more confidence, waiting for conditions to align in a way that makes starting feel safe. I understand this pattern because I've lived it. The planning feels productive. It feels like responsible preparation. It is mostly sophisticated avoidance. The moment you start, imperfectly, incompletely, with too little information and too much uncertainty, is the moment you begin learning things that no amount of preparation can teach you. How customers actually respond, what the market actually wants, which of your assumptions were wrong and which were accidentally correct. None of that information exists in the planning phase. All of it exists in the doing phase. Action creates clarity. Preparation creates the illusion of clarity. Start with what you already have, not what you wish you had, not what you'll have after 6 more months of learning. What you have right now, a skill, a tool, a service, a product idea, a problem you know how to solve. The entry point almost never needs to be impressive. It needs to be real. A graphic designer who takes their first freelance client on weekends has started. A writer who publishes a paid newsletter with 40 subscribers has started. A consultant who takes one small business client at an hourly rate has started. None of these look like businesses from the outside. All of them are. And all of them can compound into something larger if the person behind them treats them seriously and reinvests consistently. The early stage of any business is primarily about one thing: finding out if someone will pay you for what you're offering. Not building the perfect website. Not creating the ideal brand identity. Not perfecting the product before anyone sees it. Getting in front of the right person, offering real value, and seeing whether a transaction happens. That feedback is irreplaceable. It tells you more in one conversation with a real potential customer than months of market research. And it costs you nothing except the discomfort of putting something imperfect in front of someone and asking honestly what they think. Let's talk about the side hustle structure specifically, because most people don't have the financial runway to quit their job and build something full-time. The side hustle model is the answer to that constraint. You keep the paycheck. You build during the hours that are currently going to television or social media or low-value recreation. Not all of them. You need rest. You need a life. But some of them, 2 focused hours a day, applied consistently to building something of your own, compounds dramatically over 18 months. Most people wildly underestimate what consistent small effort produces over time. They imagine that if they can't build dramatically, they shouldn't build at all. This is backwards. The dramatic results come from sustained ordinary effort, not from occasional bursts of intensity. The goal of the side hustle phase is not to get rich. It's to get proof that people want what you're offering. Proof that you can generate income outside your employer. Proof that your skills have market value beyond the specific context of your job. Once you have that proof, once the side income is real and consistent, everything changes psychologically. Your relationship with your employer changes. You're no longer dependent. You're there by choice. And that shift in position changes how you negotiate, how you perform, how you think about your future. Financial optionality is one of the most underrated forms of wealth. The person who could leave their job and survive is in a fundamentally different position than the person who can't, even if they never leave, even if they love their job. The optionality itself has value: psychological, strategic, and practical. Building a small business also develops capabilities that compound in ways that a salary never does. You learn to sell, which is the foundational skill of every successful enterprise. You learn to market, to communicate value clearly to people who don't yet know they want what you have. You learn basic finance, because when it's your money, you pay attention to it differently. You learn management, even if it's just managing yourself and one contractor. These skills transfer everywhere. They make you better at your day job. They make you a more sophisticated investor. They make you harder to replace and easier to promote. The side business doesn't just generate income. It generates capabilities that make every other part of your financial life stronger. The failure rate of small businesses is often cited as a deterrent. It shouldn't be, because the framing is wrong. A business that doesn't survive didn't necessarily fail its owner. The owner might have developed skills, relationships, market knowledge, and self-awareness worth far more than the financial cost of the venture. The experience compounds into the next attempt, which goes better because the lessons from the first attempt are built in. Most successful entrepreneurs didn't get it right the first time. They got it right eventually because they kept going and kept learning. The ones who never start don't get that accumulation. They stay exactly where they are, with exactly the skills they currently have, indefinitely. Here's the uncomfortable truth about building something of your own. It requires tolerating sustained uncertainty. For months, possibly longer, you won't know if it's going to work. The income will be irregular. The effort will sometimes feel wasted. There will be weeks where you question the whole thing seriously. This uncertainty is not a sign that something is wrong. It's the nature of building something new. Certainty comes later, after you've built enough that the pattern is clear. In the beginning, you just have to move through the uncertainty without being destroyed by it. The people who build things aren't uniquely brave or uniquely talented. They're people who developed a tolerance for the uncomfortable feeling of not knowing and kept building anyway. A paycheck pays you once for your time. A business, built with patience and reinvested profits, can pay you indefinitely, including while you sleep, while you travel, and eventually, while you do whatever you decide to do next. That's not a fantasy. It's a structure, one that anyone can build, from where they are right now, with what they currently have. The only thing it requires is starting, and then not stopping when it gets uncomfortable, which it will, and then it won't. Chapter 8. The Patience Tax. Every system in this audiobook works. Every single one. The reason most people don't benefit from them isn't access or intelligence. It's the inability to pay the one price they all charge. Time. Specifically, unrewarded time. The period between when you start and when results become visible. The gap between effort and evidence. That gap has a name in my head. I call it the patience tax, and it is the most consistently underestimated cost in personal finance. Most financial strategies are presented as mechanisms. Do X, get Y. Invest consistently, build wealth, create a digital asset, earn passively, start a business, gain freedom. All of that is true. What's left out of the presentation is the duration of the awkward middle part, where your doing X and Y hasn't arrived yet, and there's no guarantee of when it will. That middle part is where most people quit. Not at the beginning, when motivation is high and the idea is fresh. Not at the end, when results are compounding and the system is working. In the middle. When the novelty has worn off, the effort is real, and the returns are still modest enough to feel discouraging. This is not weakness. It's a completely understandable response to a genuine psychological challenge. Human beings are wired for immediate feedback. Action produces result. Effort produces reward. The brain expects this loop to be short. When it isn't, when months of consistent effort produce small, incremental progress rather than visible transformation, the brain generates an uncomfortable question. Is this worth it? The answer is almost always yes, but it rarely feels like yes in the moment. Here's what makes the patience tax particularly brutal. Compounding, by its nature, is backloaded. The early returns are small. The later returns are large, and the only way to access the later returns is to survive the early ones without quitting. A person who invests consistently for 30 years doesn't earn 1/30th of their final portfolio value per year. They earn almost nothing for years, then steadily more, then dramatically more, toward the end. The last decade of a 30-year compounding trajectory typically produces more wealth than the first 20 years combined. This means the people who quit in year 5 didn't just lose 5 years of returns. They lost access to the exponential phase entirely. They paid the full price, the years of effort and discipline and foregone spending, and never collected the reward, because the reward was scheduled to arrive in year 15. This asymmetry is the cruelest feature of long-term wealth building. You can do almost everything right and still feel like it isn't working for years. That feeling is not information. It's just the nature of how compounding distributes its returns over time. The practical implication is this. When you start any wealth-building system, you need to set your expectation for the timeline before you begin. Not optimistically, accurately. A rental property becomes genuinely powerful over decades. A digital asset typically needs 1 to 2 years to gain real traction. A small business usually takes 3 to 5 years to develop stable systems and consistent income. An investment portfolio produces modest returns early and extraordinary returns late. If you start any of these expecting results in 3 months, you're going to feel like a failure at month 4 and quit. If you start expecting results in 3 years, you'll be more patient at month 4, more analytical, more willing to adjust and continue rather than abandon. Expectation management is a core wealth-building skill that almost nobody talks about. There's a related issue with how we measure progress during the patience phase. Most people measure too frequently and too emotionally. They check their portfolio daily and feel the market's short-term volatility as personal losses. They measure their side business weekly and feel discouraged when one week is slow. They assess their rental property monthly and worry when a minor repair reduces their cash flow temporarily. These short measurement windows produce enormous psychological noise, and psychological noise produces bad decisions. People sell investments at the bottom. They abandon businesses during slow periods that would have resolved into strong periods. They exit positions that just needed more time. The antidote is longer measurement windows. Assess your investment portfolio annually, not daily. Evaluate your business quarterly, not weekly. Review your real estate position every few years, not every month. The longer your measurement window, the more signal and less noise you see, and the less likely you are to make an emotional decision that interrupts a compounding process that was working fine. I want to say something directly about comparison, because it's one of the most reliable destroyers of the patience required for long-term wealth building. Social media has made it easy to observe other people's financial highlights. The business launch, the investment win, the passive income screenshot, without observing the years of quiet, unrewarded work that preceded those moments. You see the result. You don't see the patience tax being paid, and so the result looks sudden. It looks like something happened quickly, or easily, or with a particular advantage you don't have. This perception is almost always wrong. And measuring your Chapter 3 against someone else's Chapter 20 is one of the most effective ways to feel like a failure when you aren't. The patience tax is non-negotiable. It cannot be skipped, hacked, or shortcut. Every legitimate wealth-building system charges it. The only choice you have is whether to pay it and collect the compound, returns it unlocks, or refuse to pay it and stay exactly where you are. The uncomfortable truth is this: impatience is expensive, not just financially. Impatience is the mechanism that keeps most people poor, not lack of opportunity or lack of intelligence. The opportunity is available. The system is proven. The tax is time. Most people just won't pay it. The ones who will, who show up consistently through the unrewarding middle, who measure over long windows, who ignore the noise and stay focused on the mechanism. Those are the people who end up on the other side of the compounding curve, where everything that felt slow suddenly looks inevitable. Chapter 9. The Money Personality Problem. The most sophisticated financial plan in the world fails if the person executing it doesn't understand how their own psychology sabotages them. Nobody talks about this enough. Financial advice is almost entirely focused on mechanism: what to buy, where to invest, how to structure income. The assumption underneath all of it is that once you understand the right moves, you'll make them. Rationally, consistently, without interference from the person making them. That assumption is catastrophically wrong. Human beings are not rational economic actors who occasionally make emotional mistakes. We are emotional actors who occasionally make rational decisions. The emotional operating system runs constantly underneath everything, shaping what feels right, what feels dangerous, what feels worth doing, and what feels pointless. And that system was not designed for modern financial decision-making. It was designed for a completely different environment, one where short-term survival mattered and long-term planning was largely irrelevant. The result is a set of deeply embedded psychological patterns that work against wealth building systematically. Not occasionally, every day. In ways most people never identify because the patterns feel like common sense rather than bias. Let me walk through the most destructive ones. Loss aversion. This is the tendency to feel losses more intensely than equivalent gains. Losing $1,000 feels roughly twice as painful as gaining $1,000 feels good. This asymmetry seems reasonable until you see what it does to investment behavior. It makes people hold losing positions too long because selling crystallizes the loss and makes it real, and sell winning positions too early, locking in gains before they can be taken away. The net effect is the opposite of what good investing requires. You should let winners run and cut losers early. Loss aversion pushes you to do the reverse, consistently, without feeling like you're doing anything wrong. It feels like prudence. It's actually a bias eating your returns. Present bias. The tendency to overvalue immediate rewards relative to future ones. $1 today feels worth more than $1 in 3 years, even when the rational calculation says otherwise. This is the engine behind every impulse purchase, every decision to spend profits instead of reinvesting them, every choice of immediate lifestyle upgrade over long-term asset building. Present bias is why people know they should invest but don't. Why they know they should start the side business but postpone. Why they understand compounding intellectually but still cash out early. The knowledge exists. The present bias overrules it, because the future reward feels abstract and distant, while the current spending opportunity feels vivid and immediate. Overconfidence. The consistent tendency of people to overestimate the accuracy of their own judgments and the quality of their own predictions. Studies consistently show that people rate themselves as better than average drivers, investors, and decision-makers. A mathematical impossibility that reveals just how distorted self-assessment tends to be. In financial terms, overconfidence produces underdiversification. If you're confident you know which stocks will outperform, why spread across many? If you're sure your business will succeed, why maintain financial reserves? If you believe your industry is safe, why develop alternative income streams? Overconfidence makes concentration feel like conviction and diversification feel like unnecessary caution. The market does not share your confidence in your own judgment. It charges accordingly. Status anxiety. The deep, persistent concern with how you appear relative to others in your social group. This is the engine behind lifestyle inflation, unnecessary luxury purchases, and the consistent prioritization of visible markers of success over invisible financial progress. Status anxiety is why people buy cars they can't really afford and live in apartments slightly more expensive than makes financial sense. It's why the person who could redirect $800 a month into investments instead upgrades to a neighborhood that signals arrival. The spending is not irrational from a social perspective. We are genuinely social animals and status matters in real, practical ways. But it extracts an enormous financial cost when it consistently overrides long-term thinking. Now here's where it gets more interesting. These biases don't operate independently. They interact. Loss aversion and overconfidence together produce a specific and very common pattern. People are simultaneously too confident in their active decisions and too afraid to accept the losses those decisions sometimes produce. They make bold moves, get attached to them, and refuse to cut losses when the evidence suggests they should. Present bias and status anxiety together produce lifestyle inflation that feels completely justified at every individual step. Each upgrade feels deserved, each spending decision feels reasonable, and the cumulative effect is a financial life that consumes everything it earns. Understanding your specific psychological profile matters because the same biases don't hit everyone equally. Some people are dominated by loss aversion, others by status anxiety, some by overconfidence. Knowing which patterns run most strongly in you allows you to design systems that work around them rather than depending on willpower to overcome them. Willpower, as a financial strategy, is terrible. It depletes. It fails under stress. It doesn't scale. The better approach is to structure your financial life so that the right behaviors happen automatically, without requiring you to override your psychology every single time. Automatic investment contributions that move money before you see it. Accounts structured so that investment funds are genuinely inconvenient to access for spending. Commitments made publicly or to an accountability partner that make following through easier than quitting. Rules established in advance for specific scenarios. If the market drops 20%, I do not sell. That remove the decision from the moment of emotional intensity. These aren't tricks. They're architecture. You're designing a system that produces the right outcomes, even when your psychology is pushing in the wrong direction. There's one more pattern worth naming because it's less discussed, but enormously costly. The competence trap. This is the tendency to stay in domains where you feel capable and avoid domains where you don't. People who are excellent at their jobs often resist building businesses because entrepreneurship feels unfamiliar and threatening. People who understand one investment class avoid others because learning something new feels uncomfortable. The competence trap keeps people doing what they're already good at rather than building the new capabilities that would expand their financial options. It masquerades as focus. It's actually a comfort zone with financial consequences. The antidote is not reckless expansion into everything unfamiliar. It's deliberate, small-scale experimentation in adjacent areas. You don't need to become an expert in real estate investing before buying your first property. You need to learn enough to make a reasonable first decision, then learn from the experience itself. Action teaches faster than preparation, and the competence you build through doing is more durable than the competence you try to acquire through study alone. The uncomfortable truth is this: Your financial outcomes are not primarily determined by the quality of your financial knowledge. They're determined by the quality of your financial behavior. And your financial behavior is primarily determined by psychological patterns you probably haven't examined carefully. Most people treat their money problems as information problems. If I just knew more, I'd do better. This is a comfortable belief because it implies the solution is passive. Learn more. Improve naturally. The less comfortable reality is that the gap is behavioral, not informational. You probably already know enough. The question is, what's getting in the way of acting on what you know? That question is worth sitting with. Not for the purpose of self-criticism, for the purpose of design. Because once you identify the specific patterns that run most strongly in you, you can build systems that account for them. And a financial system designed around your actual psychology is worth far more than a theoretically optimal plan that your psychology will reliably undermine. Know your biases, then build around them. Chapter 10. The Leverage Equation. Most people think leverage means borrowing money. That's the least interesting version of it. Leverage, in its broadest and most powerful sense, is the ability to apply a small input and receive a disproportionately large output. Borrowed capital is one form, but there are others: time leverage, skill leverage, network leverage, system leverage. And understanding all of them changes how you see every resource you have available. The financially average person trades time for money at a fixed rate. 1 hour of their labor produces 1 hour of income. This is the fundamental structure of employment, and it has a hard ceiling. There are only so many hours. The income is therefore definitionally capped at the number of hours available multiplied by the rate per hour. No amount of effort can change the underlying math. You can work more hours, you can increase your rate, but the structure stays the same. Time in, money out, at a ratio of 1-to-1. Leverage breaks that ratio. It creates conditions where 1 unit of input produces more than 1 unit of output. And the most powerful forms of leverage are not 1-to-2 ratios. They're 1-to-1,000. Let me work through the categories. Financial leverage, the version most people know. You borrow capital at a cost lower than the return it produces. The rental property example from earlier is the cleanest illustration. You put in $40,000. The bank puts in $160,000. You control a $200,000 asset that generates income and appreciates. Your actual capital produced a return on $200,000 worth of asset. Not just $40,000. That's 5-to-1 leverage on your initial investment. The risk is real. Leverage amplifies losses as well as gains. A property that declines in value while you're carrying debt produces a loss larger than your initial investment. This is why financial leverage requires careful selection. The underlying asset matters enormously. Leverage applied to a strong asset accelerates wealth. Leverage applied to a weak asset accelerates disaster. Used correctly, financial leverage is one of the primary mechanisms through which ordinary people access extraordinary asset values. Most people could not build a real estate portfolio without it. The bank's willingness to participate, secured by the property itself, makes the math work at a scale otherwise unavailable. Time leverage. This is where it gets more interesting. Time leverage is the ability to multiply the output of your time by having systems, tools, or other people extend your reach beyond what you could personally produce. A business owner who employs 10 people is exercising time leverage. Their decisions, their systems, their intellectual contributions produce output across 10 people's working hours simultaneously. The business isn't 10 times the income of one person's direct labor. It can be considerably more, because the coordination of skilled people in a good system produces emergent value beyond the sum of individual contributions. A content creator who publishes a video that reaches 1 million people in a week has exercised extraordinary time leverage. The same hours that produced the video, if applied to a service model, might reach 10 or 20 people. The leverage ratio is not 10 to 1. It's 50,000 to 1. This is why content, courses, books, and scalable digital products are such powerful income vehicles. They separate the production time from the delivery. You create once. The leverage does the rest. Skill leverage. The compound return on invested learning. A skill, once built, doesn't depreciate the way physical assets do. If anything, it appreciates with use and experience. And certain skills produce dramatically disproportionate financial returns relative to the time invested in acquiring them. The ability to sell effectively, to communicate complex ideas clearly, to understand financial statements, to write persuasively, to build software, to negotiate well. These are not interchangeable skills. Each one has a leverage ratio attached to it. The extent to which possessing the skill multiplies your output relative to not having it. Investing in high-leverage skills produces asymmetric returns. A person who spends 6 months developing genuine sales ability doesn't just become a slightly better version of themselves. They access a completely different tier of income opportunity, because sales, the ability to persuade another person that an exchange serves their interests, is the foundational skill of every commercial enterprise. Every business is, at its core, a sales operation. Every negotiation is a sales conversation. Every job interview is a sales meeting. The financially sophisticated don't just ask what they should invest in. They ask what capabilities they should invest in building. Because the right skill compounds across every financial activity simultaneously. Network leverage. Your network is a form of capital that most people dramatically undervalue because it doesn't appear on a balance sheet. The people you know and the quality of those relationships determine the quality of opportunities that come your way. Not exclusively. Hard work and quality still matter enormously. But access is real. Opportunities flow through networks. Information flows through networks. Capital flows through networks. A warm introduction to a potential investor or client is worth more than 100 cold approaches. A relationship with someone who has already built what you're trying to build saves years of mistakes. A trusted reputation within a specific community creates inbound opportunity that would cost enormous advertising budgets to replicate through formal channels. Building a high-quality network is itself a leveraged activity. The time invested in genuine relationship building, not transactional networking, but actually knowing people and being useful to them, produces returns that compound for decades. People remember who helped them. They introduce you to others. They create opportunities because they want to. This is network leverage operating at full force. The mistake most people make with networking is treating it as a resource extraction activity. Going to events to collect contacts who might be useful. Reaching out to people only when they need something. This produces a low-quality network of similarly extractive relationships. The alternative, showing up consistently with genuine value without immediate expectation of return, builds the kind of network where leverage actually accumulates. System leverage, the ability to create processes that run without your direct involvement and produce consistent outputs. Systems leverage is what transforms a job into a business. A freelancer who does all the work themselves has a high-income job. An agency owner who has built systems for client acquisition, delivery, and management has a business. The distinction matters because the business can scale without the owner's proportional time investment. The freelancer's income scales only with hours. The business scales with systems. Building systems requires upfront investment, time, thought, often some capital, and produces returns that accumulate over time as the system runs. The systems that work best are the ones that handle the repetitive, predictable parts of any operation, freeing human attention for the parts that genuinely require judgment and creativity. Here's what ties all these forms of leverage together. They are all multiplicative rather than additive. They don't just increase your output by a fixed amount. They change the ratio between input and output, allowing the same hour, the same dollar, the same relationship to produce far more than it would without the leverage. The uncomfortable truth is this: the people who build real wealth are almost never the hardest workers. They are the people who found leverage, who structured their activities so that one unit of effort produced many units of return. Working harder inside an unlevered structure produces incremental gains at the cost of proportional effort. Finding leverage changes the structure itself. That's the difference between running faster on a treadmill and getting off the treadmill. Chapter 11. The financial identity shift. You will not consistently behave in ways that contradict your identity. Not because you lack willpower, because identity is more powerful than intention. This is one of the most practically important insights in behavioral psychology, and it's almost entirely absent from financial education. We teach people what to do with money. We rarely address who they believe themselves to be in relation to it. And that belief, that deep, largely unconscious sense of what kind of person you are financially, determines your behavior more reliably than any strategy, plan, or intention. People who grow up in households where money was scarce often develop an identity around scarcity, not as a conscious belief, but as an embedded orientation. Money is fragile. Financial security is temporary. Prosperity is for other kinds of people. These aren't thoughts they think explicitly. They're lenses through which financial decisions get filtered, invisibly and consistently. The scarcity identity produces predictable behaviors, difficulty holding money, spending it quickly because unconsciously it feels like it won't stay anyway. Avoiding investment because it feels like risking something that might not be replaceable. Undercharging for services because charging what you're worth feels presumptuous. Taking safe, low-ceiling options because high-ceiling options feel like territory that belongs to someone else. None of these behaviors feel like identity expression in the moment. They feel like common sense, prudence, realism. The identity makes the behavior feel obvious, which is exactly what makes it so difficult to change through information alone. You can give a person with a scarcity identity a perfect financial education and watch them systematically fail to apply it. Not because the education was wrong, because the identity keeps rewriting the emotional calculation at each decision point. The investment opportunity that looks rational on paper feels dangerous in the body. The price increase that makes business sense feels arrogant in practice. The asset purchase that compounds perfectly in theory feels reckless in the moment of decision. Information without identity change produces knowledge without behavior change, And knowledge without behavior change produces nothing. So what does identity change actually look like? It's not affirmations or visualization or deciding to believe different things about yourself. It's something more concrete and more reliable. It's the accumulation of identity-consistent evidence through action. Every time you make a decision that an investor would make, you produce evidence that you are an investor. Every time you protect your profit margin rather than discounting for comfort, you produce evidence that you value your work appropriately. Every time you reinvest instead of spend, you produce evidence that you think in systems rather than transactions. That evidence accumulates. It builds a body of experience that slowly reshapes how you see yourself in relation to money. This is why starting small matters so much. People often dismiss small financial steps as financially insignificant. They are financially small and psychologically enormous. The person who makes their first investment, even $50 in an index fund, has crossed an identity threshold. They are now, in a concrete and verifiable sense, an investor. That identity, once held by experience rather than just intention, makes the next investment easier, and the one after that. The same applies to earning outside employment. Your first dollar from something you built, a product sold, a service delivered independently, a digital asset earning, is disproportionately significant relative to the amount. It proves something, not to the market, to you. That your skills have independent value. That you can create income that doesn't depend on an employer's decision to keep hiring you. That identity shift, once made, changes how you see every subsequent opportunity. There's a social dimension to identity that makes this more complicated. We don't just hold identities individually. We hold them in relation to our social groups. The people around you, family, friends, colleagues, have implicit expectations about who you are and how you behave financially. When you start behaving differently, those expectations create friction. The family where nobody invests creates subtle resistance when someone starts investing. Not malicious resistance, just the social pressure of deviation from group norms. Comments that frame the new behavior as risky, impractical, or pretentious. Questions that carry the weight of skepticism. The general atmosphere of a group whose shared identity doesn't include what you're trying to become. This friction is real, and it's worth anticipating. Not so you can resent the people in your life, but so you understand that identity change often requires some degree of social navigation. Finding communities, online or in person, where the identity you're building is normal and expected, provides enormous support. Not because you need permission from others, but because identity is genuinely social. Being around people for whom investing, building businesses, and thinking long-term about money is completely ordinary makes those behaviors feel more available to you. The wealthy don't just behave differently than the financially struggling. They exist in environments where their behaviors are normal. They reinforce each other's identities constantly through shared assumptions and expectations. That's not conspiracy. It's social dynamics, and you can access it deliberately by choosing your environments with intention. Language matters here more than most people realize. The words you use to describe yourself in financial terms shape your identity in ways that go beyond metaphor. The person who says, "I'm not a business person," is not describing a fixed reality. They're reinforcing an identity that makes business behavior feel foreign and uncomfortable. The person who says, "I'm building a business," even when it's tiny, even when it's new, is reinforcing an identity that makes business behavior feel appropriate and expected. This isn't about false confidence or pretending to be something you're not. It's about recognizing that identity is not a fixed description of who you are. It's a story you're constantly telling yourself and others. And stories can be rewritten, gradually through behavior and evidence, not through declaration. The uncomfortable truth is this: your financial future is not limited primarily by your knowledge, your connections, or your starting capital. It's limited by your financial identity, the story you carry about what kind of person you are and what you're therefore capable of. That story was written largely by circumstances outside your control. Your family of origin, your early experiences with money, the cultural narratives around you, the social group you grew up in. But it doesn't have to stay the version that was written for you. Every deliberate financial decision you make is a small edit to that story. Every asset you build is a sentence that says something different than what was written before. Every reinvestment, every side hustle started, every protection put in place. These are all identity statements, made through action rather than words. The revision is slow. Identity doesn't change in a day. But it does change. One decision at a time. One piece of evidence at a time. Until one day the story you're living is the one you chose rather than the one you inherited. Chapter 12. The compounding life. Compounding is the one idea in personal finance that actually deserves all the attention it gets. The problem is that most people understand it mathematically and completely misunderstand it practically. Mathematically, compounding means that returns generate their own returns. The interest earns interest. The investment produces gains that then produce their own gains. A dollar growing at 8% annually becomes $2 in roughly 9 years, then $4, then $8. The growth rate stays constant, while the absolute numbers accelerate dramatically. Everyone nods at this explanation and then continues behaving in ways that make compounding impossible. The practical misunderstanding is this: people treat compounding as a financial phenomenon, something that happens to money in accounts. The insight that changes everything is recognizing that compounding is a universal law, not a financial instrument. It applies to skills, relationships, reputation, health, knowledge, everything that grows through accumulation and builds on its previous state. And the practical rules of compounding are the same regardless of what's compounding. Start as early as possible. Interrupt the process as rarely as possible. Reinvest the returns. Stay in the game long enough for the exponential phase to arrive. Skill compounding is one of the most underutilized forms. A skill practiced consistently for 5 years doesn't make you 5 times better than you were at year 1. It makes you categorically different. Because skills compound through pattern recognition, efficiency, and the development of adjacent capabilities that build on the primary skill. A writer who writes daily for 5 years doesn't just become more technically proficient. They develop voice, audience understanding, the ability to think structurally, and the speed that comes from thousands of hours of deliberate practice. Those compound attributes produce income and opportunity that the raw technical skill alone could not. The interruption problem applies here as well. A skill practiced intensely for 6 months and then abandoned for 6 months doesn't hold its compound state. It partially reverts. The compounding resets partially. Consistency is not just a virtue in skill building, it's the mechanism. Knowledge compounds in ways that are structurally similar. Each new idea you encounter gets integrated into a network of existing understanding. The more nodes in that network, the more connection points available for new information. This is why genuinely knowledgeable people learn faster than beginners. They have more existing structure for new information to attach to. The learning compounds. A year of serious, directed reading produces more than 12 times the value of 1 month of the same. Not because you read 12 times as much, but because the knowledge network grew in ways that made each subsequent book more valuable than the last. Relationship compounding is real and chronically undervalued. The relationships you invest in genuinely, not transactionally, but with authentic interest and consistent presence, build trust over time that doesn't grow linearly. A relationship 5 years old has more depth, more mutual understanding, and more practical value than a relationship 1 year old multiplied by 5. Something qualitative emerges through time that wasn't there at the beginning. Opportunities come through those relationships that simply don't exist in newer ones. The depth of trust enables conversations and collaborations that shallow relationships cannot support. This is why the financial advice to network aggressively and constantly expand your contacts misses something important. The compounding happens in depth, not breadth. 100 shallow connections produce less than 10 deep ones. And deep connections require time, genuine interest, and consistent investment. The same conditions that produce compounding in any other domain. Reputation compounds with particular power in the digital age. A body of work builds publicly, accumulates, and continues working as evidence of capability long after it was created. The person who has published useful, credible content for 3 years has built a reputation asset that the person who started last month simply doesn't have access to yet. That reputation, made of accumulated trust signals, demonstrated expertise, and the social proof of a track record, opens doors, reduces friction in sales and negotiation, and attracts opportunities that would otherwise require significant active effort to pursue. The compounding of reputation is why consistency in public output matters so much. Not for algorithmic reasons, though those matter too, but because reputation is built through evidence accumulated over time. Each piece of credible work adds to the body. The body speaks more loudly than any individual piece. The accumulation is the asset. Here's where the practical application of compounding most often breaks down. People start multiple compounding processes simultaneously and sustain none of them long enough for the exponential phase to emerge. They start investing and also start a business and also begin building a digital asset and also try to develop 3 new skills at once. None of these are bad individually. The problem is that each compounding process requires the same scarce resource, sustained attention and consistent effort over time. Distributed too broadly, the consistency required for compounding in any one area never materializes. The strategic question isn't what to compound. It's what to compound first, and with what degree of concentration to actually produce the results that compounding promises. Different phases of a financial life call for different compounding priorities. Early, the highest leverage compounding is almost always in skills and career capital, the capabilities that increase earning power and open higher quality opportunities. Mid-phase, financial compounding becomes the priority, as the income generated by developed skills gets redirected into assets. Later, the compounding of assets does the heavy lifting while the other domains continue growing in the background. The error most people make is trying to run all phases simultaneously from the beginning, which produces mediocre results in all of them, or focusing entirely on financial compounding before the earning capacity is there to fund it meaningfully. There's a compounding force that rarely gets named explicitly, but runs underneath everything in this audiobook. The compounding of financial literacy. Each concept you understand creates a foundation for the next one. Each decision you make builds practical intuition that the next decision can draw on. The first investment teaches you things about your own psychology and risk tolerance that no book could. The first rental property teaches you things about markets, tenants, and management that compound into better decisions on the second. Experience is its own compounding asset, which is why the most valuable instruction is often simply start so the compounding of experience can begin. The uncomfortable truth is this: most people are already compounding. The question is what they're compounding toward. Bad financial habits compound as reliably as good ones. Debt compounds. Lifestyle inflation compounds. The identity of someone who doesn't invest compounds into the reality of someone who never built anything. The direction of compounding is a choice. Not always a conscious one, but always a choice. Every day you are either compounding toward financial independence or compounding away from it. The daily difference is often invisible. The 10-year difference is staggering. You don't need to run faster. You need to make sure you're running in the right direction. Then stay consistent long enough for the math to do what the math does, which is build silently and relentlessly until the results look like they arrived overnight. They didn't. They just compounded. Chapter 13. The only question that matters. At some point in every conversation about money, someone asks the wrong question. How do I get rich? Which investment is best right now? What's the fastest path to passive income? What should I buy, sell, hold, start, or quit? These are not bad questions exactly. They're just downstream of the one question that actually determines everything. The question most people never ask explicitly because it feels too simple, too philosophical, too removed from the practical urgency of financial life. The question is this: what is money actually for? Not in the abstract, not as a theoretical exercise. For you, specifically. What does financial freedom mean when you translate it out of the generic language of audiobooks and into the concrete details of your actual life? What would you do differently on a Tuesday morning if money were no longer a constraint? Where would you live? How would you spend your time? What would you stop doing immediately? And what would you start? Most people have never answered this question with any precision. They know they want more. They know they want security. They know they want options. But the vague desire for financial improvement, disconnected from any specific vision of what it's actually for, is one of the primary reasons people fail to build wealth consistently. Because motivation that isn't anchored to something concrete and personal doesn't survive the patience tax. It doesn't survive the ugly middle. It doesn't survive the moment at month 7 when the investment hasn't moved. The side business is still small, and the lifestyle hasn't changed in any visible way. Abstract goals, financial freedom, wealth, independence, sound powerful. They produce almost no actual behavioral change under sustained pressure, because they're not connected to anything specific enough to feel real when things are difficult. The person who knows precisely what they're building toward, a specific kind of life with specific features, made possible by a specific financial structure, has access to motivation that the person chasing a vague concept simply doesn't. So I want to push you to answer the question, not now, necessarily, but soon, with actual precision. Not I want to be financially free. That means nothing actionable. But I want to reach a point where my passive income covers my basic expenses, which means I need $4,000 a month from assets I've built, which means I need roughly $600,000 in income-producing assets, assuming a conservative 7% return. That's a number, a direction, a specific thing you can build toward with specific decisions. Or perhaps the answer is simpler. I want to have enough saved that I could walk away from a job I hate and take 6 months to figure out what's next. That's a different number, a different timeline, a different set of priorities. But it's real. It's anchored. It produces actual decisions. The clarity of the destination changes what you do at every fork in the road. The person with a specific financial target knows whether a given purchase or investment moves them toward or away from that target. The person with a vague desire to be wealthier has no reference point for any individual decision. Every choice exists in isolation, assessed on its own immediate terms, rather than in relation to a larger direction. This is the function of a financial goal that most goal-setting advice misses entirely. It's not motivational, it's navigational. It tells you which direction to move when you're standing at a decision point with multiple plausible options. Without it, you're making local decisions in a fog. With it, you're making local decisions with a map. Here's what I've observed, and what I think is worth naming directly. The people who build real wealth are almost never primarily motivated by money itself. They are motivated by what money makes possible: time, autonomy, the ability to work on things that matter to them, the capacity to be generous, the elimination of a specific kind of anxiety that financial precarity creates. Money as an end in itself is a thin motivator. It runs out of emotional fuel. The number in the account, past a certain level, stops producing the feeling it was supposed to produce. But the thing the money was supposed to enable, the life, the freedom, the option, that remains motivating because it's connected to something human and specific. The wealthiest people I've studied or read about in any depth share a common pattern. They got clear on what they wanted their life to look like before they got clear on the financial number. The financial number emerged from the life design, not the other way around. They built their wealth in service of something, not in service of the wealth itself. That sequencing matters. Life design first, financial architecture second. This chapter is the last chapter before the conclusion, which means this is the point in the audiobook where most similar works would deliver a rousing call to action. Go build your empire. Your potential is limitless. Start today and never look back. I'm not going to do that. Not because it's untrue exactly, but because that kind of ending treats you like someone who needs enthusiasm injected from the outside. You don't. You have everything you need. The information in this audiobook is sufficient. The principles are proven. The systems work. What I want to leave you with instead is a more honest kind of challenge. Go figure out what you actually want, not what you're supposed to want, not the version of financial success that looks good from the outside. The specific, personal, maybe slightly unglamorous version that would make your actual life meaningfully better. Because the danger in consuming financial content, audiobooks, podcasts, YouTube channels, all of it, is that you develop a sophisticated intellectual relationship with ideas about wealth without ever translating those ideas into decisions in your specific life. You become fluent in the language of financial independence without actually moving toward it. You understand compounding without letting anything compound. You know about assets without owning any. Knowledge consumption is comfortable. It feels like progress. It is frequently a sophisticated form of avoidance. The next step is never more information. The next step is a decision. Specifically, the smallest possible decision that moves you from knowing to doing. Opening the brokerage account you've been meaning to open. Listing the spare room you've been meaning to list. Writing the first version of the product you've been meaning to build. Having the conversation with the bank about the property you've been researching. Small, concrete. Irreversible in the sense that once you've done it, you've crossed from the world of knowing to the world of doing. That crossing changes something. It changes your relationship to the information. Suddenly, the concepts aren't ideas you're carrying. They're tools you're using. Here is the one thing I want you to take from everything in this audiobook. If you take only one thing, the systems work, the compounding works, the assets work, the leverage works, the identity shift works. All of it is real and proven and available. The only variable in the equation is whether you engage with it or continue to understand it from a comfortable distance. Financial freedom is not complicated. It is patient. It is structural. It is built from ordinary decisions made consistently over time. It does not require genius, extraordinary luck, or a perfect starting position. It requires clarity about what you're building, systems that make the right behaviors automatic, the psychological self-awareness to recognize when your own patterns are working against you, and the patience to stay in the game long enough for compounding to do what compounding does. You now have the map. The terrain is exactly what it looks like on the map. Long, sometimes boring, occasionally discouraging, and ultimately navigable. The question that matters is not whether you understand this. It's what you're going to do with your next dollar, and the one after that, and the one after that. Because that sequence, one decision, then another, is not just how wealth gets built. It's the only way it ever has been. Nobody arrives at financial freedom dramatically. There's no single moment where everything clicks. No transaction that changes everything overnight. No morning you wake up and find that the hard part is finally over. The movies want you to believe there is. The highlight reels want you to believe there is. Even most financial content wants you to believe there is, because the dramatic moment is more compelling than the truth. The truth is quieter and considerably more useful. Financial freedom arrives gradually, then undeniably, one asset at a time, one reinvested profit at a time, one decision made at a fork in the road in the direction of the harder but more compounding option at a time. You don't feel it building. Then one day you look back and realize the structure is already there, already working, already earning while you were doing other things. That moment of looking back is the one nobody puts in the brochure, because it doesn't look like victory. It looks like Tuesday. I want to be honest with you about something as we finish. Everything in this audiobook is real. The systems work. The principles are sound. Assets compound. Leverage multiplies. Digital products earn. Real estate appreciates. Diversification protects. And businesses built with patience and reinvested profits eventually run without you. All of that is true. What is also true is that knowing it changes nothing by itself. You can listen to this twice, take notes, feel genuinely motivated, and be in exactly the same financial position in 3 years if the knowing never becomes doing. That's not a criticism. It's a pattern. A very human Very understandable, extremely expensive pattern. The gap between understanding and action is where most financial potential goes to die. Not in ignorance, in comfortable, well-informed inaction. So here's what I'd ask you to do. Not a 10-step plan, not a grand overhaul of your financial life. One thing, the smallest possible version of one thing from this audiobook that you could actually do this week. Not plan, not research further. Do. Open the account. List the item. Write the first page. Make the call. Put the automatic transfer in place. One thing. Irreversible. Done. Because the first action doesn't just produce its direct result. It changes who you are in relation to this material. You stop being someone who listened to an audiobook about building wealth. You become someone who is building wealth. That identity shift, small as it seems, is the actual beginning. Everything else is preamble. The 7 systems in this audiobook are not secrets. They've been available for decades. The people applying them are not smarter than you, better connected, or born into different circumstances. They're people who started, stayed consistent, paid the patience tax without quitting, and let the math do what the math does over time. You are capable of the same. Not because your potential is limitless. That's the kind of thing people say when they want to sound encouraging. But because the systems don't require limitless potential. They require ordinary consistency, applied in the right direction for long enough. That's genuinely available to you, right now, with what you currently have. The money you earn from this point forward has 2 possible futures. It can pass through your life, converted into experiences and objects and lifestyle, leaving nothing behind that works in your absence. Or it can be directed, some of it, not all, just enough, into systems that grow while you sleep, earn while you rest, and build a structure underneath your life that changes what's possible. Most people choose the first option, not consciously, by default. You've spent time with this material. You understand the difference now in a way you didn't before. That understanding is only valuable if it changes the default. Change the default. Not because financial freedom is the most important thing in life. It isn't. But because financial stress is one of the most consistent destroyers of the things that are. Relationships, health, creative work, presence, generosity. All of these are harder under financial pressure. Not impossible, but harder, and unnecessarily so, given that the systems exist. Build the structure. Let it do its work. Then turn your attention to the things that money was always supposed to serve. That's the whole game. And it starts with what you do next.